Hello. So I've just been reading more from Composing Pictures, and Don Graham brings up a very interesting point here about. He says there's two ways of making pictures. One is on page 15. It is possible to begin a picture by placing on a surface an area of color or a line, which then suggests more areas, colors, or lines, each dictated by the position, direction, size, shape, intensity of the previous accumulation of graphic disturbances on the picture surface. We might say such a picture grows or develops. It is directed by the artist but motivated by the graphic elements themselves. At some point, a concept of the picture as a whole may be formulated, but not necessarily so. Such pictures are of necessity non-representational. More often, a picture is based on an idea. Is the picture to be informative, illustrative, abstract, non-representational? Does the idea involve a representation of figures, nature forms, or invented or imaginary shapes or forms? With whom are we trying to communicate, and on what level? Informative, emotional, or both? Our investigation will be confined to the making of pictures based on an idea, but in no way should this be construed as denying the merits of the first method of beginning a picture. So I find this concept pretty interesting because it's probably one of the it's a weird kind of a weird paradox that, like, this book and as well as Successful Drawing by Andrew Loomis and Anatomy Lessons from the Great Masters, I'm constantly trying to understand all three books together, and this idea here, I think, helps shine some light on what is happening in Western art, and also this weird thing that, like, because I would say the West has the weirdest abstract non-representational stuff, like Jackson Pollock and Picasso, and there's more in here, where it's like, I mean, just very abstract and very strange and kind of at times grotesque and weird on purpose just to be weird. And we don't really see that in Eastern art and stuff. Like, the other examples in here are, some of them are very abstract, but they still have like beauty and harmony and things in there. So that's kind of just one of the ideas in this. The other one is probably more interesting, which is that we are focusing on, or he's telling us to focus on, our investigation will be confined to the making of pictures based on an idea. So this is the key, I think, to dividing the two kind of halves of Western art. There's the abstract art for art's sake and emotion and pure kind of expression, and just like he describes, I guess a good example would be like, how did Jackson Pollock paint his paintings? He just put a canvas down and started dripping paint and throwing paint, and then as he kept doing that, layer by layer, he kind of crafted he didn't start with an idea. He put the paint down and let it. He responded to every paint drop and every splash of paint that appeared. He like, he didn't just randomly do it. As he looked, you can see that he kind of fills in areas. He kind of creates a texture over the whole canvas. He doesn't just randomly splash. He looks at the painting and he keeps adding here and there. But it's this pure in the moment building up, like he says, accumulation of graphic disturbances on the picture's surface. And it grows and develops, and it's guided by the artist, or it's directed by the artist, but motivated by the graphic elements themselves. So I think that's an important decision to make on this book and this style of art, which is that this style of art is for this book, and the other two books are the representational, informative, emotional, ideal, creating a picture that communicates something that you already had. Like you have an idea, and then you're building something to share that idea, which is different than just seeing what happens as you create. I guess the good way to think of it too is like we're using painting, we're using drawing as a means to an end, and the end is our idea. And the means, drawing is just the means to the end. So if we have a drawing of a figure, the idea would be how the figure is positioned and what they're doing. And so we have all these things that maybe, for us, especially for a storyboard, we're thinking of character, we're thinking of scenes, we're thinking of location, like how locations are going to be used throughout the story. We're thinking about a lot of stuff before we actually draw. And so we're not just exploring graphic elements. We're trying to answer questions. We're trying to think about what cause and effect is happening in the story. And so there's a bunch of ideas and reasoning and things that are happening mentally before we actually draw. That's kind of it for these pages. So he's kind of introducing, kind of want to do a recap because it's been a while since I read, but he's kind of telling us the two parts of the picture, kind of like the subject and the surface, the two ways of making a picture is like just pure graphics or having an idea. And now he jumps into the image. And I think the reason it's good to sort of understand that the making of pictures based on an idea is that it kind of gives us, I would say it gives us a motivation for this type of drawing, because it helps us understand like why we're actually drawing. And then if we kind of know that, we end up having more guidance on like what to practice and like how do we know we're getting better at what we want to do. There's all these questions that have to come up because art doesn't really have very strict rules or design or ideas for, like, especially nowadays, anybody can say art is anything, and just kind of talk about endlessly what art could or couldn't be and all this stuff. So it can kind of be a very murky place to get lost in. So I think this book is really good at answering like philosophical questions that that ground the ideas and help narrow the focus from everything else in the world that is kind of pulling at us. Like there's this ability to narrow, kind of bring our attention towards progressively more and more precise ideas. And then whether we want to follow them or not is up to us. But at least we're getting language that's precise and guiding towards guiding us towards a specific idea that's well defined in concrete terms. So I think that's kind of a rare thing, which is why most of my favorite books on these subjects are kind of before the 1960s. There's some that are good after that, but a lot of them start to use language that gets just too far out there. In here, he's literally describing how a painting is constructed line by line, color by color, area by area, and what's going on with the artist, the motivations, and all this that I think are really difficult to do in a vacuum. What I mean is like if you're not like working at an art studio that has all this stuff figured out already and practicing it, if you're just by yourself studying online, trying to find books on the subjects and things, it's like can be very disorienting. So I'm enjoying this book a lot. It's the second time I've read it. And I just enjoy how clear the writing is. Even though things aren't like over-defined, you kind of, it's like, but that's how humans communicate anyways, I think. We're not always over-defining every word we use. But I think it's like a 80-20. Like 80% is completely simple, concrete language. 20% leaves it open for an interpretation. And so it's great because I think we've kind of flipped that in most other forms of media now or teaching books on teaching things and whatever is like pretty abstract and pretty timid, and people don't really want to say what they believe or get caught or called out for taking a strong position on anything because then they can be criticized or whatever. So there's a very fearful experience reading these books where you're like, just say what the fuck you mean to the author in your head, but they don't. So it's kind of frustrating. So this book, I think he does a great job of just saying it what he means and saying it without fear, and it all builds together. Like, I don't know, you can tell when an author is mentally ill or not, and whether they're mentally healthy. And this guy's very mentally healthy, very smart, very passionate about this, writing in kind of the high renaissance of animation in the 1940s and 50s. So it's like this really cool, kind of like the last time for real greatness, I feel like. Like when people are like, yeah, we're going to build stuff and we're going to land on the moon and we're going to like create the coolest movies and music, and I don't know. We're like more people still listening to the music of that era, like the 60s and 70s rock and things are like still super popular. And the films that came out at that time, 101 Dalmatians and others, they're like there's this weird kind of high point, the Jungle Book. There's this weird high point in art, music, design, literature, communication, and I think for me, um, there's almost this sense that like when you find yourself adrift in floating around or like lost, the best thing to do is kind of retrace your steps back to where you know where you were. Um, that doesn't make sense if you're floating around on the ocean, but kind of maybe like the last known point. If you went off the beach here and now you're floating, okay, swim back to that beach. Because if you're just floating out in the middle and you don't have a ship and you're not, a whole crew and everything, you're not Columbus and you're like, if you're not setting out on an expedition of pure, freedom or whatever, if you're just a solo and you're trying to kind of just explore a little bit, then it's better, I think, to like maintain your orientation, maintain like where you are, what's going on in your life, so that you can like be effective at I don't know. It kind of goes back to when I was in high school and it was like 2005. YouTube just came out and there was all these parkour videos. And I remember the Russian dudes were crazy and the British guys and everybody. But I was 15 at the time and I was starting and I was kind of practicing these moves, and there was people who were making these YouTube videos of like different moves to try. But the one thing I remember is that I was doing these jumps, like dropping down off a roof, and you don't start on like a 2-story building. You start by just jumping off like a dumpster or something, not even the roof of a house, but just like a balcony that's halfway up the house. And you start small and you kind of, over the weeks, your muscles get stronger, you absorb the impact, you learn to roll properly, you learn to handle what you're going through physically, and the feeling of shock on your feet, on your knees, and like different surface textures. And so you're constantly building up your ability. And I think that applies to everything we do. So with art, it's kind of the same way of like, you kind of want to be able to gradually increase the complexity of what your understanding is on art and the theory behind it or whatever, if you're curious about that. And obviously, I'm not drawing right now, I'm just talking, so it's all theory. But I think that's kind of how I approach this stuff too, is like, okay, we want to go, okay, we're reading, we're looking around, we're reading, we're curious, but at the same time, kind of confused, kind of thinking, I don't know, that doesn't really sound right. So then back it up. If authors today aren't making sense to you, then read about the people who came before. And if they're not making sense, keep tracing back to a time in history where there was enough clarity in the thinking that you can that it hooks you and you start understanding things. And if you go back too far, then it gets kind of even, like I read some of the manuscripts on drawing. They were like from 1600 1650s and stuff. And they have their drawings in there, and their diagrams are just like really weird, really corny. And then their language is very different, very like Old English. I'm like, I don't even know what. Half the words you're like, don't understand the context, what they mean. So there's usually this kind of window of time where you can understand the language enough. You're not too far from the language, but you're also not too close to modern times where everybody's doing the same thing, everybody's reading the same books and thinking the same thing as you. So it's kind of like, and also finding the high points because I think like these books are loaded with awesome drawings and paintings that nobody today is putting together this much copyrighted material, like there's so much. I don't know how these people got permission to use so many different paintings, pictures and stuff all in one place. Like you can't find these, a lot of these you can't find them on the internet. They're in private collections and stuff. Somehow at one point they were in a museum. Somebody said, hey, can we take a picture? And then they got the rights. And so there's all this like anatomy lessons from the great masters. There's a bunch of drawings in there that are in private collections in Europe that are not on display, and photographs are not publicly available because they're copyrighted. And Robert Beverly Hale was in the art industry and had connections to ask people to get their copyright. So there's like the Queen of England signed off on him basically being able to use some of those drawings. So they're actually hard to find. And that's what I mean by like finding high points. Like for music, the 60s, I don't know, the 70s, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC. There's these high points where like every generation who hears that music is like, whoa, these guys are the real rock stars. So there's like high points in civilization, high points, low points, the golden age, right? So like finding what are we in the golden age of now versus what was the golden age 50 years ago. And so that's kind of like why I just love reading this book, in terms of it's the golden age of animation. It's the golden age of the art teacher who actually worked at Disney. It's the golden age of having access to all these different copyrighted materials that you would think the internet is actually the golden age of free access to art, but it's not. Try looking up all these pictures online. Very hard to find. They're all here in one book. So it's actually the perfect storm of like English written in a clear, precise way, not too old that I can't understand when I read it, but not in a modern way of being just ego driven by authors being way too self-reflective on their writing as they write. You can tell they're like just constantly, I don't know, I can't read a lot of books written in the last 30 years, like my lifetime, because they're way too self-censoring as they're writing. You're like, I'm like, half the time I'm like, what do you sound like? You're trying to cover up something, or like you're embarrassed about what you think or believe. So these are just kind of what I've been thinking about as I'm reading this book again, and enjoying the process of getting into it. I think the only criticism I have of my practice is just getting through this more quickly. Pretty dense book, and I'd like to get on to the other ones too. And I think time is important here. So, with that being said, I'm going to end this video, and I think I'm going to try to read through this as quickly as possible. I do want to take notes though, so that'll slow me down a bit. But I think the faster I can get through this with taking notes, the better, and the more progress I can have in terms of like, because what I really am trying to do is read these books, kind of put them all in my mind at once, and then shake it and see where they match up and what falls out of that, and what I need to focus on in terms of clarifying these ideas more for the next generations, and making my own drawings and everything meet and exceed their drawings and their diagrams and stuff, so I can keep, like, that's what I mean, like going back to the high points and picking up there. It's like civilization, if we think about it like a person wandering into a wilderness, the Western humans wandering in the art of, the forest of art. And we've had a few generations now that like got lost as fuck and fell in a lake and stuff. And so we're like, whoa. And we kind of just wake up in the tribe, born, and we're like looking at our peers and we're looking at our parents and be like, what happened? And we see evidence of greatness in the past, but we're not really seeing it here. So for me, I'm kind of like, okay, where were we? Where did we just come from before we fell in this lake? Where were we before that? So it's like retracing our ancestors' steps and finding, getting back to like, here's the trail, and walking back up the trail and finding, this old camp here was like a great spot, great hideout. They had a fire pit, they had this stuff. We start to see the structures of civilization that came before us that were like well done. Then when we move forward again and we explore more of the wilderness, we're like, okay, we kind of know what to look for because we went back in time. We found the old ways of doing things. So now we can move forward and carry the spirit of what was the highest points of civilization. And like fix the mistakes of our parents, fix the mistakes of the people around us who are also just kind of too narrow-minded into whatever's happening right now, and forgot the past and forgot what the real mission was and forgot like how to really do things properly. Like if you want to know how to build something, like if I wanted to know carpentry, I would not look at the new stuff. I would look at like, how were people building 200 years ago? Like find the coolest houses. These modern homes aren't that cool, so go find what are the coolest houses you've ever seen. Study that. Study the architecture there. What's the coolest music you listen to? Okay, study those songs. What are the coolest drawings, paintings, animation? That's what I'm trying to find in here. So, it's a beautiful day out. Very sunny. I'm probably going to go do some pull-ups and things. Anytime I'm reading or studying, I need to take a break and go exercise. I feel a lot better and the ideas sink in better. Drink some water. I ate some good food today, some eggs, bacon, some good sourdough bread. And that's another thing, like nutrition. Nutrition for artists, it's got to be a priority. You can't be a starving artist. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Now you can fast a lot and like whatever for clarity's sake, but you can't be living off ramen noodles and stuff. You got to eat meat and real food and egg yolks and stuff. That's the other thing, like we're not at the high point of nutrition. Processed food is the norm. Obesity is the norm now. Heart disease, whatever. So if your body is struggling just to freaking breathe and just get oxygen, your brain ain't working either. And you're not going to be producing the art you really want to make. So take care of yourselves out there. Take care of your body. Eat meat, dairy, and eggs. That's pretty much. If you look at the high points of civilization, that was the dominant diet. A lot of these artists were living at high points in civilization where they had really good livestock. And there were basically a lot of these artists from the Renaissance onward were guests, or their patrons were royalty. And they would literally, part of what they did was live in the palace and eat at the king's table. So they were getting really well fed and their minds were working well. And so, yeah, these are kind of the things I think about when I study. So hopefully that inspires somebody out there to make good art. Let me know. I want to see more. And if you're interested in animation, hand-drawn animation, then follow me on YouTube here. And this has been Composing Pictures by Don Graham, legendary art teacher for Walt Disney's Golden Age. And I do want to start doing the 6 basic drawing skills. But I need to make a, what's it called? I want to make a wheel, like a spin the wheel game that has the 6 basic drawing skills. Because for practicing, I find it hard to pick one of the 6 basic drawing skills to practice. So if I just take that away by using the spinning wheel, like Wheel of Fortune, and I just spin that, and it'll pick one of the 6 randomly for me. Thought about using like rolling dice, but I think spinning a wheel is prettier. So maybe I'll make that today. We'll see. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, then you can like. You can leave me a comment. You can message me if you have any questions or you just want to tell me something. Then let me know. I'll read them for now. All right, bye.